Alright guys, welcome to the last video in chapter 5 on binary fission and conjugation. And in this we're talking about bacterial reproduction and bacterial change. When we say bacteria, we should think prokaryotes. Prokaryotes. Remember our review back at the beginning of the chapter. Now, prokaryotes don't have DNA in a, same thing. They don't have DNA inside of a, in chromosomes or chromatin. What they have, so if this is my bacteria, they have a ring of DNA. It's kind of curled up. So this is bacterial DNA and it's in a ring. And it floats around. There's no nucleus. Remember again, that's one of the things about bacteria. They don't have prokaryotes. They don't have a nucleus. And they've got this ring of DNA that's free floating. So when they go to divide, when they reproduce asexually. Asexual reproduction. And way back a long time ago, you guys knew that the prefix A was on a vocab list. Do you remember what it means? A means without. So when these guys divide, here we have they have their ring. It's kind of all, looks like it's a big mess. They duplicate that, and then they begin to split, and we get two identical daughter cells. So it's a lot like mitosis. Binary fission produces two identical daughter cells. Produces two identical daughter cells. So in that way, it's a lot like mitosis. But bacteria need change too. They need variation, and that's why they have conjugation. This is where their variation comes from. So in this diagram, let's make the genetic information, let's make this green. This is their DNA. We've got two bacteria here next to each other. It doesn't look very green, does it? We have, so this is bacteria 1 and this is bacteria 2. They have structures that stick out, and I'm going to write this a little bit larger, called a pilus. Pilo, I believe that means hair in Latin. I guess they thought this looked like a hair. And they have free-floating pieces of genetic information called plasmids. They're smaller pieces of genetic information. Smaller pieces, or rings actually, smaller rings of DNA. So here's a plasmid. We'll do that in pink. So what happens is they use this pilus and they make a connection. And they send a copy, or they create a copy of this plasmid that gets sent to the next bacteria, so that by the time they're done, this piece of genetic information is in both of them. So conjugation, well, let's talk about, before we define it, let's talk about how that could be helpful. So maybe this is a bacteria that survived an antibiotic. The antibiotic wasn't strong enough to kill this bacteria and it survived. Another bacteria comes along. This gene will tell, it has the code that let this bacteria survive. So if it can pass this gene to the next bacteria, this bacteria will know how to survive. And that's exactly what conjugation does. It's kind of like this bacteria stole the key to a test, and it lets the bacteria pass the test. So he's going to pass that key around to his buddies. So conjugation allows for change in prokaryotes. Which we could also say bacteria. So even bacteria need change, just like we do. Pretty soon, if all the bacteria have the key to the test or the code that's going to give them the antibiotic resistance, that antibiotic isn't going to work. And that's exactly what's happening. We're having more and more troubles in medicine today with bacteria that can't be killed by antibiotics. They're very good at changing. And again, that change drives natural selection. The bacteria that are better able to survive the antibiotics then are the ones that reproduce and they're more resistant to the antibiotics. So that's a great example of change leading to natural selection. Evolution would be when we get to the point where all the bacteria are strong enough to not be killed by any of the antibiotics. So natural selection is going to be change over short term. Evolution is going to be change over a long term. It's going to be a while. Hopefully, we'll never quite get to that point where we're completely, the bacteria evolved beyond what we can do with science. But it's something to consider, especially in the age of pandemic. It's um, something to take very seriously. So, while we're on the topic, what can you do about it? Make sure you take all the antibiotics that are prescribed to you. Don't ever stop antibiotic partway through because you're going to leave a lot of these guys alive. You're not going to get the chance to kill them off. And try to only take antibiotics if you really need them. Okay, so this was a short one, but that'll wrap up the chapter for us. So everybody needs to reproduce. And we should have said this back at the beginning with animals and more complex species. They do that sexually with an egg and a sperm that you produce through meiosis, the egg and the sperm. And then they combine through fertilization. Bacteria just split themselves, asexual reproduction. Animals can, and plants can get variety through crossing over during meiosis. Bacteria have to do it through conjugation. All right, thanks for watching.